Today I'm going to show you how to get started making your pajama pants. But before we start, we need to gather all of our materials. So you're going to need some fabric, a pair of good shears, tailor's chalk, some pins, a measuring tape, your pattern, an iron, and your ironing board. Another thing that you need to do before you start sewing is to wash and dry your fabric in hot water. That way, if you're using cotton or another natural fiber that can shrink, your material is already pre-shrunk, and after you make your pattern, the size is going to stay the same after you wash it. Now, I've got some fabric here. I'm going to put the good side down, and I'm going to iron it using steam so that everything gets nice and flat. The steam will help get out all of those tough wrinkles, and if it's flat, it will be much easier to sew with later. Another tip that I would also give you is when you're ironing your material, if you have a large piece of fabric like I have here, put a chair or something beside your ironing board to lay the fabric that you're not ironing at the moment on, because after washing and drying the fabric, you don't want to get it dirty by having it drag on the floor. The fabric that I'm using here today is woven fabric. I can tell that because my cut edge here has these yarns that are fraying. Now, I've put the good sides of my fabric together and I'm going to smooth it out. This fabric has a grain, which means basically the yarns or the threads that make up the fabric are all running a certain way. So I want to smooth it out so that everything is running in the same direction. And if you don't do that before you cut your fabric, what can happen is your fabric won't fall properly when you wear it because the yarns aren't going across your body as they're supposed to. We also have this edge here, which you'll notice isn't fraying, and that's called the selvage. So we have yarns running back and forth and from side to side. So there are ones going vertical and some going horizontal. So when they're going horizontal like this, they need to wrap around the side and come back. And they keep sort of going back and forth and looping at the end. And this end here doesn't fray because it's where the thread's looping around. So there aren't any loose threads there. So what I'm going to do now is grab my pattern. And on the front I can see that there are different things with different pieces of clothing with letters on them. And I'm going to make the pants on this. So that's E. So I open up my package and I'll find two different things. There's this tracing paper like stuff that's a little darker and thinner paper. And then I have this other paper here, and these are my instructions. So if you look on the first page, which will have your pattern number and pattern name on it, it will tell you what pieces you need. So on mine I'm going to find the pants, which are E, and it tells me that I need piece 11 and 12. So I open up these tracing paper type sheets and I find the ones that say 11 and 12. Okay, so I've got those out now. And if you look at your pattern instructions as well, it'll also give you a suggestion of how you should lay them on your fabric. So I've chosen this material with mousse on it. I'm going to make my brother a pair of pants for his birthday, which is coming up in a couple weeks. So since there's a pattern to my fabric, I want to make sure that all of the mousse are going to be in the same direction. So when he's wearing the pants, there aren't some that are sideways and upside down. If you're using something like a plaid pattern, this is also important because you want your plaid to match up. So what I'm going to do is take my first piece and lay it on my fabric here, which I've smoothed out. I've made sure that the threads are all going the same way. And you'll notice there's something called a grain line on the fabric, or on the pattern, and it has a big arrow that's pretty long. So what you need to do is match the grain line up to the fold in your fabric. That's going to help you make sure that all of the threads are going the same way so that your clothes fit right and look right. So I take my pattern and place it on my fabric, and then I take the measuring tape that I had and I measure from the grain line on one side to the fold in the fabric. And that's at 8.5 inches on my pattern. So I take one of my pins and I put it right sort of underneath the grain line on the pattern. Then I go to the other end of the grain line and I'm going to measure 8.5 inches again from the fold. And I might need to adjust my pattern because I had put this on crooked originally. So there you go. I've got it at 8.5 inches and I'm going to pin that down. And that's great. Now I'm going to pin the other parts of my pattern down. You might notice that there are different kind of dashed lines on your pattern. That's for different sizes. So for example, if you're extra small, you're going to follow the dashed pattern that's for extra small. If you're medium, you're going to follow the line that is for the medium all along the pattern. So that's important to pay attention to. So now that I know that my grain line's straight, I'll pin all the other edges down, mostly at the corners. You can always put some along the side as well. Just like this. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is take my tailor's chalk, and I would choose a color that contrasts with whatever color your fabric is so that you can see where your lines are when you need to cut it later. So you're going to take your chalk and go all the way along and trace out your pattern. You'll notice as well that there are some places where there are some triangles. Those are called notches, and they're going to help you line up your pattern so that everything gets straight and comes out right at the end. So when you see those triangles, just to do a little triangle out and continue down on your pattern. You can take your time with this too so that you make sure that your lines are nice and straight. Okay, and you go along all sides of the pattern. We've got another notch here. There we go. That didn't take very long at all. My brother's actually pretty tall as well, so I'm going to add a couple inches and make his pajama pants a little bit longer. There we go. Now, this is my first piece. Normally what you'd want to do as well is place all of your pieces on your fabric before you start to cut, but I know that I've got lots of fabric. I've made this pattern several times. So now, I'm going to cut this piece off. Once your pieces are all placed on your fabric, you can cut the pieces off of a large piece of fabric like I've done here, and it makes it a lot easier to cut it out. So I'm going to use my very good shears just to cut along the line that I just traced. You can also take your pattern paper off if you'd like at this point. So when I make my notches, when I get to those triangles, I'm going to do what's called notch out. So I cut away from the paper. I cut a little triangle away from the paper, not into the paper. If you cut into the paper, that can cause problems later. So I now have the two pieces that my pattern asked for, piece 12 and 13 for this one. I've matched up the grain line so that everything's going to be straight. I have notched out all my fabric, I have cut it out, and I'm ready to start sewing.